In the meantime, those that are here, anyone new that's popped into the room, you can just use the little plus sign at the bottom to ping people into this room that you think may be interested in the conversation. If you have a lot of followers, you can narrow the search to people who might specifically be interested by using a search word or looking up specific people. Otherwise, you can just use that and tap people's faces and it will give them a notification.
Hey, Julie, can you hear me now?
Yes, Christine. Perfect.
Good.
That is much better, Christine. Thank you.
No problem. I'm here though.
Great. And just while we're waiting on everyone to get here, a couple other, sort of announcements and a welcome to our club, Consuli Conversations. I'm Julie Schmidt. I'm host for this club and project manager at Consuli. So as we get started, while we're pinging people into the room, also, take a moment to check out our panel. Others that are in the room, we're inspired, follow them. Anyone with a party hat is new to Clubhouse, so you can support them by following them as well. And, for those that don't yet know Consuli, broadly, Consuli is a public benefit company with the mission to enable individuals to participate in the data economy. Experts do suggest our individual data is worth about $20,000 per year. So we do this by operating a marketplace for members where we become their agent and assemble patients' health records, labs, prescriptions, wearables, quality of life survey, things of that nature. And importantly, members receive smart matched individualized offers from us for opportunities, including to participate in clinical trials, data trials. So there's no cost for anyone to join our movement. You can learn more at consuli.net. It's CONSULI.net. And everything that you need to know about us is also in my bio. So please be sure to check that out. Follow me. That way I'll ping you into future rooms. Follow our club by tapping the little greenhouse at the top. You'll get notifications from there as well. You'll see our upcoming rooms. We also host a data dignity and a long COVID patients meet researchers room. And it's now my pleasure to turn the floor over to our room co-moderators, Talia and Michael Young, who will be introducing themselves, and our expert guests. Michael, now over to you. This is Julie, and I'm done speaking.
Thanks, Julie.
Michael.
I'm sorry, Talia. Can you please do Talia? Hi. Would you please do your introduction?
Sure, happy to. Thanks, Michael. Thanks, Julie. I'm really thrilled to be here again for our monthly Clubhouse discussion on all things clinical trials. I'm Talia Height, and my background is in trial site operations, from clinical operations to business operations. I started as a research coordinator at a small clinical research site, and then sort of moved from that into a very large clinical research professional site, over to the CRO space and to the sponsor space as well. Right now, I'm in an early stage startup in working on technology and services in the trial space. And I really love taking this opportunity every month to bring together trial enthusiasts to come to this Clubhouse and talk about one burning question. So thanks to Michael and the Consuli team for inviting me to co-moderate today's discussion. We're going to be opening up the discussion on this week's one burning question here soon. We're going to get introductions from some folks that we have on stage with us this morning. Michael, did you want to introduce yourself, or should we go forward with some introductions for our panelists?
Sure. I'm happy to just point out that we are holding this Clinical Trials Clubhouse every month on the first Friday of that month. And the attention we've gotten on LinkedIn and Twitter has been tremendous. So those of you who are listening, please feel free to invite any of your colleagues and people who would be interested in particular. We love to hear from industry folks as well as the patient community. And we have a couple really outstanding patient advocates who are a part of this today. start by introducing or turning this over to Christine von Reesveld. And Christine, if you don't mind, please introduce yourself.
Sure. So I'm looking through the room and I know many of the people in here, so I want to say hi. I am Christine von Reesveld. I'm founder CEO of a nonprofit called People with Empathy, and we're really just looking towards the future of medicine and really how precision and personalized medicine can help people. And I'm going through a little bit of a rebranding, so stay tuned. Exciting things happening. And I was actually also just named as one of HIMSS 50 Future 50 Innovators. So one of 4 patients globally to be chosen, and 2 of us in the U.S., 1 in the UK, and 1 in Germany. So really cool things happening, and happy to be here. I've participated in many clinical trials, many studies, and stuff, so I'm happy to give my perspective. Thanks.
Woohoo! That is excellent. I'm glad to hear that. Michelle, would you take a moment and introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you very much, Michael. I'm happy to be here today. I am also with Consuli. I recently joined as the Chief Development Officer, focused on the revenue side of the business. My background is over 30 years in the life sciences and healthcare industries. Most recently, I've had about 4 years consulting to the industry in the area of operational and growth strategies. I work a lot with startups, having been in the C-suite of 3 startups in my history. And previously I co-founded a company called Science Media, and we brought innovative products in the learning and development area to life sciences, focused on the clinical space and increasing clinical competency. Happy to be here today.
Hey, Michelle, this is Christine. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I was just wondering, I was looking at your profile and I didn't see any links to social media. Are you going to put any up there, or is there a way to find you if people want to contact you? Sorry.
Yes. Thank you for mentioning that. I was playing around with that a little bit. So I'm an Android user, and they just recently allowed that functionality for Android users. And so I was frankly looking up my password into Twitter and the others. So I will get those on my profile. Thank you.
Edie, how about you? Please introduce yourself.
Absolutely happy to. Thanks so much. So I'm Edie Edens, and I am a senior consultant with First Class Solutions, and I oversee our research compliance and life sciences consulting line. So I'm an attorney by trade, a licensed attorney with a research ethics and international law background, who spent a decade inside an academic medical center, both on the enterprise-wide side of IRB and human research protection programs, misconduct and QA, all the way to being actually embedded within different research departments, including the Comprehensive Cancer Center that I was a part of in that ANC. And then came out and have spent the last, I can't believe it, 4 years already with First Class Solutions, doing consulting across pretty much anything you can think of in the research compliance and ethics space as it relates to our wonderful industry. And I'm super fired up about our question today, so I'll leave it at that and let us get started.
Sure. Before we get started, I just want to give Elizabeth a chance to introduce herself. And then Talia, I'll let you take it from there and introduce the one burning question.
Hey, Michael, I'm really listening today, so please feel free to move forward since I'm a guest on the panel, so please go ahead.
Okay, well, we're good with that. I'm sure you can chime in as you like. Talia, I'm going to let you take us into the discussion.
Awesome. Okay, I'm really looking forward to this one too. So this month's one burning question for today's discussion is on informed consent. And the question is, informed consent, whether written or electronic, is too complex for patients. Are patients or protocols the problem? And what are we doing about it? So that's our question. We're going to start with our panelists, and then we're going to open it up to everybody here in the clubhouse. So again, please raise your hand if you'd like to be called onto the stage when we get to that part of the discussion, and Julie can bring you up, or one of the moderators can bring you up. Just please raise your hand. And I'm going to actually ask if Christine can sort of kick things off with your perspective on this.
Sorry, I was trying to ping people into the room when you called on me. It would be, this is an interesting topic to me because I do think the consent, sorry, I'm like, there's so many things to say on this issue, and I really want to hear some of your perspectives before I tell you what I think. But I do think that it is difficult to understand, and I think the way we go about the informed consent and even the way we go about clinical trials in general is really just all wrong. And really, if I could sit back for a second and hear all your perspectives and then give you mine, I'd love to hear what you all have to say first.
Yeah, of course, Christine, sure. Edie, how about you? I know you have such a wealth of knowledge here, lots of perspectives, and you and I have talked about this in depth. Why don't you go ahead and share with the Clubhouse some of your views on this to get us going?
Thank you, Talia. Thank you. So this is Edie. Sorry, earlier I didn't sign off. I try to be mindful of that. So I think for me, having studied research ethics and the origins of informed consent, as well as being a licensed attorney and seeing it from that lens as well, I really start with the historical roots of informed consent. And when we look back to, and certainly in keeping it, short, because we could obviously have whole semesters on this topic, when we think about why, from a clinical research or clinical trial perspective, or research ethics perspective, if you will, why informed consent was so necessary and really was something that was so important and valued, it was in the wake of atrocities that were recognized in the courts of Nuremberg, right, where our Nuremberg Code is born from, or the Declaration of Helsinki, and then we move into more US-based principles like the Belmont Reports. And so we came from a very noble mindset of this is really to ensure that a human being has all the reticent information that they could possibly need, good, bad, ugly, all of it, every single data point about participating in a trial, and make a really well-informed decision for themselves. And so again, our baseline here is a really positive thing, but we've hit some really tough roadblocks, and that's before you even get to a global pandemic, which I think put all of us face down, right, in some way, shape, or form, and of course, decentralized and virtual hybrid trials, which bring their own new complex challenges, as well as frankly benefits too, right? And that is that you began to have those who are immersed in clinical research, who are likely clinical professionals themselves, trying to author and explain very difficult concepts in very simplistic ways, right? The average IRB asks for an 8th grade level consent form in most clinical trials. That is tough at best, right? So first becomes an issue of communication. Are we really, is this document really communicating what we're so concerned about and what we've seen go so awry in our history in clinical trials? And then I think the second point becomes, once it became regular practice to actually review informed consents, not only to require them, but to actually have things like IRBs to ensure that the informed consent didn't make promises that weren't true, right? Didn't overlook risks that the patient needed, and had all these different kind of QC checks built in. Unfortunately, IRBs, and those of you who work as an IRB professional, I know will probably blink me on this, we end up becoming in an IRB, especially at a large institution, far more than just an institutional review board. It's the privacy board. It's the ethics board. You usually have members of your team of general counsel for your organization sitting on the board. You usually have extra institutional and organizational policies that get wrapped into your informed consent and your IRB documents and QC checks. And so slowly over time, it not only goes from being difficult at best when everyone's trying to communicate well through these barriers, to now we're going to add a lot of extra jargon pieces, bullet points and sections that add an extra 20 pages to an informed consent form that was already complicated enough before. And so for me, that's really the landscape that I want to have this conversation about, that I want to hear what others have to say in it. Because I think that those are your two primary hurdles when the consent begins to protect the organization or the patient, and it's not going back to its primary purpose, which is to inform the patient. And even when we had that primary purpose in front of us, were we even able to meet it? Were we really effective communicating? I think once we tackle those things, right, then we begin to move into the next phase of considerations and barriers such as decentralized trials, remote consent, moving across different demographics and cultures while we consent, et cetera, and having translations. So I'm going to park it right there and see what others have to say. This is Edie. I'm done talking.
So Edie, can I comment really quick on the level of education and the lowering the level of communication here? Is really, I don't think we need to lower anything. What I really think we need to do is raise the education and awareness around what clinical trials and an informed consent really is. And I think sometimes when we lower the standards, we're also letting that population of people feel like they're not knowledgeable enough to do this. And so really, I think the key lies in really empowering people and educating them on what this is and even what clinical trials are. Look, we have clinical trials just came into the picture when COVID hit. Before that, half the people in the United States didn't know what one was, and they still don't know what one is. So really, I think that basic education really first needs to come into play and letting people know what clinical trials are, that these are not a last-ditch option, but really a way to push medicine and innovation. And I think that's how we need to reframe this. And then as we look at informed consent, now we have a knowledgeable population instead of one that feels like they're less than because we have to move to an 8th grade level. And I'm Christine, that's my perspective.
I really agree, Christine. And I hope it's very clear that for me, I understand the need from an IRB administrator's perspective to quantify or follow a regulatory standard that says 8th grade language. It's born out of a journalism standard, but I'm with you 1,000%. I think that if there was a greater understanding community-wide and there was a better open conversation and dialogue happening with all of our patients, even those who are ineligible or remain uninterested after we explain to them the beauty of clinical trials. Like you said, COVID brought us into this environment where it's on the evening news. We have an opportunity, and that creates a completely different type of patient. I also think there's some specific therapeutic areas where it's even another category beyond what you've mentioned here, Christine, and that is a lot of my time in oncology. And what I've found in oncology and what I've heard multiple researchers in that space say to me over and over is, this person is in fact in that what I call stage 4 scary space. You can put whatever you want in that 5-page, 15-page, 50-page document. They're going to sign it and they're going to move forward. They don't have other options. And so there's a breakdown of reasons that communication barriers exist. I think the one you bring up is, like I said, the absolute majority. But I also think that there are other spaces where it has nothing to do with intelligence or communication. It has to do with a set of circumstances. And I don't know how we are at our best at being most sensitive and communicative and empowering, but also not coercive in those moments. This is Edie. I'm done speaking.
Can I say a few words?
Yeah, absolutely, David. Please come in, and then I'd like to make sure that Linda gets a chance to speak as well.
Okay. My name is David Ostro. I started in this area of ethics back in the beginning of the AIDS epidemic when the Reagan administration was opposing any funding for research. And I had a grant request to, at that time it was NCI, National Cancer Institute, about the first request for proposals in AIDS research that was approved but not funded. And the Secretary Grant, who was the Deputy Secretary, I guess I should get to my point. I agree with everything you're saying, but there's another dimension to all this, and that is science does not take place in a vacuum and is subject to a lot of other forces, largely political, biases, financial, greed, etc., monopolies, etc. And to talk about, yes, it's very important to talk about the informed consent process and how you get that information and how you convey the results of the study and so forth. And is language people understand and so forth. But understand there's a whole nother layer of bureaucracy above that that is determining what research gets done and how it gets interpreted and enacted. And so my name is David Ostro, and that's all I'll say for now.
David, this is Michael, and I really appreciate your comments because this is a multidimensional problem. And Linda, I'd be kind of very interested, given some of the ethics and protocol side of things that you get involved in. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And then we have a wonderful patient advocate who has a tremendous mission. Effie Parks is going to join us shortly after that.
I just started following Effie, and thank you for inviting me. Julie, I actually asked you to add Lisa, who's a colleague of mine who probably has something valuable to add to this discussion. So, yeah, oh gosh, there are just layers upon layers of discussion, nuances. One of them is so clinical trials and the data that is gathered, okay, generally speaking, is protected by HIPAA. However, with the advent of things like the Apple Watch and Fitbit, which are not protected by HIPAA, what's happening with that data? How is it being used? And which ties into the whole issue of data dignity that drew my attention and drew me to join with Consuli in what we're doing. So how do patients, how do the rest of us get built into the data economy? And thank you for inviting me. And I'm done for now.
Thanks, Linda. Effie, so wonderful to see you. Please take a couple minutes and explain to folks how you got really into this clinical development arena, because it's both very personal and professional.
Hi, everybody. This is Effie speaking. I only actually have a couple moments, and I'm sorry I was late today. I'm about ready to get my son on his school bus. So, yes, just real quick, I have an almost 5-year-old son who was born with a rare disease called CTA and everyone syndrome. And I think, as many of you know, the diagnostic odyssey and the treatment odyssey is it's intense beyond measure. And I set out to find my people and began a podcast to learn from people like you, from parents, from patient advocates, from science, people with science backgrounds, just to kind of gather their stories and put them on a platform for families like me to learn from. So that's kind of my role in the advocacy journey at this point. So thanks for letting me come up here and talk for a second. I see the bus coming around the bend. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I look forward to listening still if I can. Thanks.
Absolutely.
This is Effie, and I'm speaking.
Effie, thank you so much for the time that you spent. And, we're all here advocating for trying to make things easier for people like you, and certainly for people who are advocating for patients who can't advocate for themselves. So thanks. This is Michael, and Talia, I'm going to turn this over to you for a little bit more.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. I think we've heard really, really great comments so far. Just, want to sort of invite everybody in the room here. If you have a thought, if you have a question, please go ahead and raise your hand, and we'll start to sort of bring people up to the stage here. Again, the question we're exploring today are questions. Informed consent, whether written or electronic, is too complex for patients. Are patients or protocols the problem, and what are we doing about it? And we've already heard from some of our speakers today that have sort of reminded us that even just evaluating this problem in the context of patients and protocols is too narrow. That there's a dynamic environment, and we've got science and politics and many other factors that are contributing to this sort of problem that we have in front of us. So just reminding everyone to ask a question, please raise your hand. I'm going to kind of weigh in myself here. I think Edie made this point earlier, and I completely agree with it, that I think that what, that informed consent has sort of become, at least the form itself, this sort of paper version or electronic version, to me, in my opinion, has largely become a cover, a CYA in terms of value, providing some sort of coverage or something to the institution, to the organization, to the sponsor, to everybody, and not really to the patient. And so I actually had a patient, I remember this pretty clearly, like in probably the first 2 or 3 years of being a research coordinator in the early 2000s, I had like a 20-page informed consent form for a simple allergic rhinitis study, a phase 3 study that we were doing, my site was doing. And this patient was like, what is this form? We were explaining, we were trying to do the process, not the form so much, just making sure that we were actually administering informed consent as a process to make sure the patient understood the study and was able to ask questions and all these things. And the patient was like, I feel like this is just a bunch of stuff in here that I don't even understand, why am I being asked to sign this? Like, can I just say that I agree with the study? Instead, I'm being asked to not just sign this document, but I'm actually being asked to initial every page, because that's how that form was actually set up. And the patient just almost felt like they were, I remember this clearly, like that they were almost taken advantage of, and that their initials and their signature was supposed to mean that they understood everything. And that was very, as a young person in research at the time, that to me, I didn't even really know how to respond to that. And I completely understood what the patient was saying, but I realized I felt ill-equipped to even sort of explain why we were trying to take, an hour of time to explain the study to the patient, but then we were asking them to initial and date, very precisely in a very specific place on this big form. And it just, just felt like it was so in conflict with what we were trying to do, but then we were bringing this big legal document out. And so, just sort of an anecdote from my perspective early on in my career about that's always stuck with me about the informed consent form itself. And I think electronic consent, I love the idea of eConsent. I think that we haven't quite solved the problem before we've introduced a new avenue for administering this big legal, all of this information to a patient. But I just recall always feeling as a person in clinical research that this was an issue. And so just sort of sharing an anecdote from my perspective. Would love to hear from others right now. This is Talia, I'm done speaking.
If I could add something, I actually have a couple of informed consent Harvard stories, and maybe all of you do, to share. But 20 years ago, I had to have surgery, and there were things in the consent I did not want to agree to. And after I'd carefully planned the surgery, cleared my schedule, and it was actually relating to the use of the tissue. And it was, I don't know if you guys remember the John Moore case, but basically I didn't want them to use my tissue and then if there was anything special about it, claim the intellectual property. And I said, what happens if I don't sign this or I scratch this out? And they say, we scrap the surgery and we'll have to reschedule it. And that was not okay. I'd love to hear about other issues that people may have come up against. I'm done speaking. This is Linda.
So this is Christine, and can I just say one of my best experiences in clinical trials, and I've done several of them in addition to clinical studies and all of that, was with a company. I spoke on stage with them at Startup Health, but their original motive was going direct to consumer, right? So the woman that called me, that walked me through the consent form, was actually someone that I could relate to, that I could talk to, that it wasn't so technical that it made things difficult. And so I really think that we have so many patients who have been through this experience of clinical trials, and our doctors' offices are just overworked and don't have time. But we have a whole untapped workforce of people who would be able to relate to that community doing the trial, right? That we're doing the trial on, who would be able to recruit them by just saying, this is helping me or whatever it is. But I think, again, this goes back to the awareness on the trials and them, the positive thing that they are. But my last thing and the thing that I want to comment on is with the technology coming forth and with, whole genome sequencing and the digital technologies and devices and watches and even your car collecting information, we're coming along the next digital age, which will be the largest distribution of wealth. And what I think is that the patients in this case are going to be the individuals who generate the most data that these products and therapies are going to be built with. So the conversations really need to be around digital rights and how, if you are signing informed consent, and there are things, like you said, where your tissue is going to somewhere else, that you have rights to that. And I'm going to date myself a little bit and say, this is like my song and it's my record. And if you want to play my record, you have to pay me. Because I, as an advocate, have been on many of your platforms. I'm on 3 unbranded pharmaceutical campaigns. I've lost records, and I don't have a vested interest in anything I'm doing. And so that's something we really need to consider. And I'm Christine, and I'm done.
Wow, Christine, that's exactly putting it on the line there. I know, Dr. Lisa, you've been waiting a bit here. Do you have some comments that you'd like to add?
Can everybody hear me?
Yes, I know you're fairly new to this platform, but it's great.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for the warm welcome. My name is Dr. Kramer. I present computer science, artificial intelligence, and nanotechnology. And what you all are listening, sorry, I haven't tapped in, probably the midway of your clubhouse meeting. But from what I was listening, that you were talking about how data is very important, especially in the general communications. And you're probably, I don't know if you are familiar with, there was a lady by the name of Rebecca Jones. She was a data scientist around. She was dealing with some data with COVID-19 policies, and she helped to create a Florida's COVID-19 dashboard. And she found some incredible information about Governor DeSantis, how he handled the COVID-19 sightings. And so they didn't like it to the satisfaction, so they tried to find things against her. So they came to her home, and they offered the offenses against using the computer. So they were trying to find ways to try to charge her, but the Florida Department of Law provided incredible information. So she created a dashboard showing that the numbers were not exact what they were showing to the public. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but especially when you're dealing with pandemics, maybe this is something that we might want to be concerned about. And another thing I'm kind of concerned about is that our rights as patients. So if we have like a DNR or DNI doing it today, we do not necessitate. Some states are required. So what can we do to have data that will grant?
Dr. Kramer, I'm kind of curious, do you feel that that kind of disclosure needs to be put into the informed consent?
I think so as well, absolutely. And then there are some people that are probably are in that in the Ayurvedic part, so maybe they don't even go to doctors. Maybe they are more to the holistic approach. So is there something that maybe that can also be incorporated into the patients that don't go to traditional physicians? They'd rather maybe natural, holistic, Ayurvedic.
Very good points. Linda, did you have something you wanted to add? Otherwise, I'll ask you to go on mute.
Oh, sorry. I didn't realize that.
It's quite all right.
Thanks.
No problem. Amy Sitnik, thank you so much for joining. We have been talking, whoops, we just lost Amy. There she is. I'm
back. Technical problems today.
Amy, are you on an Android?
Oh,
okay. I was just wondering.
We have been talking about our burning question around. Yes, can hear you fine. We've been talking around informed consent, and while I know you deal obviously in the financial management of clinical trials,
yes.
I'm kind of curious from your perspective, and I know that that you invited one of your other working colleagues, Chris, to potentially join. If you could ping him in, that'd be awesome. But I'm kind of curious from the standpoint of how much financial disclosure do you think needs to be put into informed consent?
Oh, it's a really good question. And we actually, at Greenfire, you're talking with a sponsor client of ours recently, because we're very concerned about financial burden and potential financial burden, and just the time and effort that goes into participating in a clinical trial on participants. And so the sponsor client said to us, what would be great is even ahead of the consent process, could you do education about the financial impact and, just things that you should consider? Could you create a brochure or something? So we really actually just finished a piece with Syscripts on patient costs and reimbursements of clinical trials. So you can have those types of conversations about expenses, about logistics, and what's covered by insurance, what's taxable, like all those things, even before consent, whether that's eConsent or, a paper copy. So I do think that there has to be, if we want to keep patients involved in clinical trials, we have to, definitely talk about what it's like. What is the requirement from their standpoint? And, obviously we advocate for, the sponsor and CRO community to do as much as possible to treat patients, participants in clinical trials humanely, and remove as much as that financial burden that would otherwise cause somebody to drop out.
So can I make a quick comment too?
Yeah.
Cool. I just wanted to say, I think we have all these discussions around the informed consent, and what I really think needs to happen is just a sit down, right, with everybody involved. I think what we're missing is the collaboration key, is really get an informed patient in the room with a payer, with a provider, and look at this from all aspects, right? Because I see in this clinical trial space, we see primary physicians who don't want to give up patients to clinical trials, and now you have this weird space where patients can really contact the pharmaceutical industry on their own. And it's kind of a mess. So really, I think reevaluating the whole consent form with all the parties who would be involved at some point or another, and making sure it's all okay, right? I mean, this is really just a bargaining thing at this point. Who owns the data? Who does this? And you can't make those decisions or make somebody agree to things when you haven't even talked to them. So I don't know, that's just my perspective on it. And I find that consent forms are all basically the same, but maybe should be tailored to each of the trials and what you're going to do with the tissue samples or data and all of that information, and maybe signed off individually on different parts. I'm not sure where to go, but that's just my thought. This is Christine, and I'm done.
Can I respond to that for a second? I think there's an earlier step. That's very important what you're talking about. But I believe that before you even put together the research protocol and grant proposal or whatever, you need to meet with the intended target audience of your research and find out what questions they want addressed in the research. Because the problem often is researchers think they know what patients want or need, and they really don't. And the research then is irrelevant, and the only reason they might participate in it is because of a monetary reward. And that's a form of coercion that we don't want to see in clinical research.
Hey, David, can I comment on that really quick? I work and I consult with a lot of startups here in the Bay Area. And the one thing that I find that's very interesting is a lot of these are physicians who see an issue or a problem. And what I think is interesting, though, is sometimes I've seen panels of people where this is 9 physicians, high level physicians who have come together and they see this issue in this patient population, when that patient population doesn't even see it as an issue. So I think that is key, looking at your populations and what the population that you're looking at is already accustomed to, and really looking at them in detail, which is why I think involving some of the patients who have been involved in clinical trials to really educate people and give the benefits of what trials are, and then maybe also offer trials at a level when you first sign up for a health insurance plan. When you have no comorbidities, when you have no exclusions, you now have a clean sample of a person who was given an option while they were sane and before they got a serious diagnosis, that you can either do traditional therapy or try something new. And I think really just giving that option and having options and an informed consent is what's needed. So I'm Christine, my perspective.
Well, thank you for that, example of what I was saying. But understand that when you sign up for insurance, especially if it's a Medicare or Medicaid or a PPO, whatever, you are giving permission for your data to be collected and put into a database that can be made available to researchers without your permission. And so that is why a lot of research now is done what we call on registries and databases. The only requirement is that your identification be anonymized. But the problem with that is, depending on what information is used in the study, there may be very few people with your characteristics or living in your geographical area. So there's a whole area of statistics that looks at these proposals and determines whether or not a person can infer the identity of a participant from their publicly available data and then exclude that data or that area from the study. Again, this is a rather technical thing, but it's going on all the time, and it's going to become more and more the norm as we move towards outcome research rather than the kind of standard clinical trial research.
Can I make one comment to that point? Is that I think we stigmatize illness too much in our society and in the world, and we de-identify people because of whatever, we're trying to hide this. But I think we're coming to an age with the digital information and the technology that's coming out where I don't want to be de-identified. I want my data out there. I want people to know what I have to offer, and I want them to take advantage of it. But I also don't want them to take advantage of me in the process. And so cases like Henrietta Lacks and Tuskegee and horror stories about clinical trials that are coming out and not even happened so that long ago. Those are all things we also need to address. But again, I mean, it's coming down to digital rights and where we're going to go with there, because if there is digital rights for patient and I have vested interest in any product or service that comes from my data, I'm going to give it to you. And then my entire community is going to buy that product because it was built around us. And I don't think that's what industry understands yet, but they will with all the technologies coming out. You have models now fighting for their digital rights because they're realizing they can't publish a photo that was in a magazine because they don't own it, even though it's them. So it's going to be interesting coming up. And I'm Christine. I'm done.
That's really interesting, Christine. Thanks for sharing that. Edie, I just wanted to give you an opportunity. I saw you sort of come off mute a minute ago. Is there something you wanted to add here?
Yeah, I mean, really interesting conversation here. I wanted to circle back a bit to what Amy was discussing that her company was doing in terms of the financial side and educating participants and potential participants and patients, because I thought it was interesting. And it kind of hits on the one comment I would make on the conversation that David and Christine were having back and forth here for a minute, because I definitely appreciate the topic of data, digital rights and data privacy. I think for me, the lawyer in me has a hard time with that conversation, because even once you have one person who wants to be identified and one person wants to be de-identified, we still have to make a rule that encompasses everyone, right? And our rules and our regulatory infrastructure haven't changed. And what I spend a lot of time with my clients saying is, I'm all about being a part of the change, and we're all here because we care and because we want to be a part of that change. But there's also ways to work within the current regulatory infrastructure. While our regulatory infrastructure may not be ideal, or we're waiting for change or advocating for change. And that's where I wanted to get back to what Amy was talking about, because what I've seen work really, really effectively in some of your most truly complicated therapeutic areas and trials that are heavy on the patient burden, difficult to understand, targeting a very specific, hard to reach demographic that's truly only in certain spaces. Has every possible barrier we can think of, right? And where I see research sites and research trials thrive, and sometimes it's the site, sometimes it's the sponsor, sometimes it's a combination, is where they're doing those types of steps like you mentioned, Amy. And they're breaking it down into different pieces and components, right? So a little bit like Christine mentioned earlier, one part of it is, have you ever been a part of clinical research? Let's just talk about what it even is and what it even means and some of the things you're going to hear about. And then other parts of it pertain to finances and what it means, and letting the patient know that if they're interested, we'll help talk to, here's the people that can help talk to your insurance company and find out more information for you, so they don't feel alone as they process these individual pieces of information. And we don't hand it all to one person in one document and go sign, initial, right? It's a little more digestible, because I don't care if you have gone to have all the initials behind your name and you've gone to all the silk stocking schools. Anyone who has a diagnosis, who's concerned about their health, who's making strategic decisions in the wake of type of diagnosis, can be in that paralysis in that moment if you've been the patient in the room. And it is hard. It is unbelievably hard to process large amounts of information. And so I think it's that approach and finding those educational pieces. So I'd love to hear some more details, Amy, if you're willing to share about how you actually employed it and what and what kind of patient feedback you got, what kind of provider sponsor feedback you got about using it. I know it's related to finance, but still, it might be kind of a window into using it in other spaces.
100%.
Thank you. I'm done speaking. This is Edie.
Edie, I totally agree. I'm happy to share. And I love, listening in on sessions like this, and then also getting feedback from clients, because you can sort of think, if we think and sort of parse out that client, or patient journey, that's where you can sort of uncover, some opportunities, and a lot of opportunities around education. I love your idea around, parsing out the information rather than giving it all in one overwhelming bunch. They're already, a lot of times overwhelmed with whatever the healthcare scenario is that they may, personally dealing with. It's a lot, for somebody who may not be well, and then to get all this paperwork, have to deal with it. So in our scenario, we were actually talking with a client who was really interested in increasing diversity in their clinical trials. And so we were talking about it in that lens. And so we were thinking through, and it's an oncology biotech. They said, we're happy to, educate the sites around the importance of diverse recruitment, but let's talk about the patient blockers and like the patient experience. So if you were, to recruit a qualified participant, what could you give that person that would help to sort of ensure that they're going to stay in the study? And so, and sort of identify those top reasons, so if you look at all the reasons why someone might drop out of a study, it's all around, takes too much time, or it's more expensive than I thought. And, we're gonna have to pay for parking, and plus, my transportation and my meals and the time away from work and all of that stuff. And all that can be sort of unanticipated by that individual. So rather than create a piece on our own, we went to Syscript because we see them sort of a trusted source of information, and they provide a lot of patient-facing collateral. And we didn't want it to be about our solution. This is really about the problem at hand and how do you educate. So we thought they were a validating source that we could partner with. And so we, outlined the content together. We did a bunch of research online, et cetera. And then it did go through several rounds of patient panels. And it went through, IRB approval before it was available. And Syscript literally just tweeted it out and posted on their LinkedIn and et cetera, just within the last hour. So it's a new piece, but we started working on it last summer, and we wanted to do it right. Even though it's a small sort of a trifold brochure, we wanted to make sure that the language was easy to understand, that it had helpful questions, so to go to your doctor or your clinic and say, how much time is going to be expected of me in this, study, and, what are the requirements? So they sort of felt enabled and educated about what are the things that a patient, and myself as a patient, should be familiar with. So we did a lot of due diligence and vetting of the material before making it live. And I hope it's a resource. So now it's available on the Syscript website, and anyone can use it either electronically, or they have a print fulfillment center where you can, send a way to request for printed copies. And the other cool thing is that it's available in Spanish. So it's both English language and Spanish. So
thank you so much.
Amy,
I'm so sorry. Thank you.
Yeah.
Amy, it's Michael, and you heard it first here on Clinical Trials Clubhouse. I appreciate that info. I want to make sure that Mark has an opportunity to jump in here, because what we've been talking about truly affects the entire spectrum around treating clinical trials as a treatment option. And so, Mark, I'd be very interested in understanding how what we've been talking about in terms of informed consent affects you.
Yeah, thanks. I did drop in a bit later. It's fantastic, obviously, to hear the array of expertise, and even the 20 minutes I've been listening is really useful. I think, as you stray away from more, let's say, or specific trials into chronic ambulatory, the key thing is, if you go into mainstream cardiovascular, mainstream diabetes, respiratory vaccines, is you're tending to deal with people who aren't as informed in their disease as particularly someone who's in rare disease. And I think the key thing around informed consent is the pressure there is in a research centre to randomise. I think you can't underestimate that, particularly when you go to professional sites. So the challenge, I think, around informed consent is to be able to sit down a patient, and more importantly, the caregiver in some circumstances, because the caregiver may be the person doing the travelling, doing the parking, and you've kind of covered a lot of that. But usually, I don't think there's enough time for that reflection point. The Declaration of Helsinki came in for very specific reasons. And I just think when you go into the large-scale chronic ambulatory disease, the speed in which you randomise, and I use kind of site management organisation or professional site languages, the speed at which you randomise has a real impact on the speed at which patients leave research. And I think some researchers are under pressure, whether it's the nurse or the PI, to get the patient through the process. I feel that these informed consents aren't really informed consents. They're just so full of information, and someone mentioned about parceling it up. But the more time, we did some research when I was back at Synexis, and we knew that we need 6 to 8 touch points with a patient, and to get them ready for research. So I've always said, if you want to keep patients in research and teach them that this is an option to them. What you can't do is sit them down and randomize them. And what you're trying to do is take the patient who meets the inclusion criteria and get rid of that like a randomization mindset and say, actually, are you the right candidate for research? Do you understand what you're getting into? Does your family understand what they're getting into? Do you understand the long-term commitment and the need for you to stay engaged? And there are some particular things when you move into like Eastern Europe, and that's quite interesting. So like places like Poland, where there's still some skepticism around clinical trials. If you bring a patient in and sit them down and they're randomized on the day, maybe they're coming for cardiovascular, they've been part of a health check, offered a clinical trial, and joined up. There's often when they get home, they speak to their families, and their families are like, no, you shouldn't be doing this. So I really think informed consent needs to focus not just on the patient, but the caregiver, so they understand what they're getting into, and that there needs to be enough reflection point in that step towards it. Because chronic ambulatory or rare disease oncology, these are healthcare options when there's not an alternative on the market. And I just kind of stress more around Europe as you go into Eastern Europe. If you've got cardiovascular disease, you had a heart attack, you might get 10 milligrams of statin. That's the standard treatment. So it's really attractive for a patient to think, actually, I'll be up titrated to 20 or so, like maximum tolerated dose. I will get access to a PCSK9 inhibitor. These are things that they cannot afford to get to. So healthcare is as research as a healthcare option is really interesting, but we've got to go back and make sure we're educating not just the patient on being involved in the trial, but also the healthcare, their care providers, their family, so that they join as a family. So I've rambled on a bit there, but that's my thoughts.
That's really great, Mark. Thanks very much for sharing. I think I saw lots of blinking microphones with people agreeing and sort of agreeing with what you were saying there. So thanks for sharing that. Want to ask Sean. Sean, welcome to the stage. I know we're approaching sort of the end of our hour here, but Sean, if you have anything you'd like to add, go ahead and jump in here.
Yeah, thanks, Talia, and thanks everybody across the state. And this has been a really fascinating discussion. I'm not, I would say, a career clinical trials professional, but I've been in the space. I lost 2 grandparents to Alzheimer's disease, and after I lost the first one, I wanted to get involved. And what I was really doing was working as a third party to sites, using big data, finding people who were at risk or had dementia concerns, who wanted to get involved in the science, and then helping them navigate towards either a site or a diagnosis to get into a site. And there was a lot of great discussion here, particularly I think Mark, who just said there's the pressure to randomize, but also I think it was Christine who was saying people who are currently patients or who are current or former caregivers, the role of those people and the potential of those people to help not to help randomize, because that's not necessarily the goal, but to help it to increase the understanding of prospective patients and their caregivers when it comes to really understanding the research, I think is huge. When we went into Alzheimer's sites and we're working with those sites, Alzheimer's, at least, there aren't that many more these days, particularly with COVID, but it's a field that's strewn with research disasters because ultimately we couldn't find people early enough, or at least that was the main barrier. But we were able to increase the successful randomization with staying power, people who then did drop out of the trials, by something like 100-fold, by using people who had been in the space, who had been caregivers, and who really were able to help people really understand and navigate the research. So I think that there's, this is a great conversation, and we haven't even touched on really the idea of informed consent as a CYA for the industry, and whether or not that's, does it have to be that way? How can that change? We talked about the complexity of how long a consent document is. Can people possibly absorb all of that information in weeks of time, let alone, the day that they're there to sign? But I really appreciate the contributions of all of the people on this panel. I'm Sean, and I'm finished.
Sean, it's Michael, and I can't thank you enough. I agree with you. one of the ugly secrets here is really how informed consent does provide that CYA, or what I call clinical rectus protectus. So I'd like to make sure that everybody here on the panel and listening right now knows we're going to go about another 3 to 5 minutes. I will ask Julie to just kind of refresh the room. And Julie, if you have any other comments you want to make before we get to our discussion about what the next one burning question ought to be.
Hi, everyone. This is Julie speaking. Just a reminder to follow everyone on the panel. Make sure that you check out everybody's bio, follow Consuli Conversations so you can get updated for the next rooms coming, get pinged for that. Clubhouse now lets you add that to your calendar, so we'll get those rooms up ASAP. And that's it, just a friendly reminder to follow everyone, check out my bio, follow me, and get updates from us. Thank you, Michael. It's Julie, and I'm done speaking.
Cool. So one of the unique features of Clinical Trials Clubhouse is that we take the last 3 to 5 minutes to just kind of canvass the group. This would include anybody who is in the audience who wants to jump to the stage and offer a thought about what is the next topic that we need to discuss. It seems like we've only peeled back the first layer of this particular onion, and I'd be very, I think all of us who are on the Consuli team here would be very interested in knowing what comes next. Do we talk about ways in which to fix this, or do we still have more problems to unveil? Christine?
Hey, Michael, I have lists of notes right here. And I just wanted to say 3 things that I think maybe we can discuss, and I'm not sure how we do it, but first is the treatments that we offer already as standard care, and really just that step therapy issue, and talking to patients about that. Because to me, standard treatments is what ruined me. According to my pharmacogenomics, right, the regular standard treatments gave me brain damage and joint replacements. So I would have happily taken a more advanced treatment using science to try and solve my issues, especially since there was no diagnosis and we were basically just treating symptoms. So my 2 questions, though, that I was going to say is how do we reframe clinical trials so that people don't think of these as a last-ditch option? Because I've spoken with clinical trial leaders who it depends on your space, on what you view a patient as. And so that would be one. And my other one is I love the collaborations. I love that I too work with Syscript, and Amy, you built that with them, and just really seeing the teamwork and the things coming out of the collaborations. So really just exploring how real collaborations can really advance drug development, maybe using the CF community as an example, and Aurinia Pharmaceutical is another one. They just developed a drug in less than 4 years with the lupus community that hasn't had a drug in over 50 since, when Benlysta was. So really just looking at valuable patient collaborations and collaborations among all stakeholders. So I'm going to stop now because I rambled on too long. Thanks.
Thanks very much. Anybody else want to venture a topic? What we typically do is we will canvass our networks nationwide, and that's how we came up with this informed consent topic. But anybody else want to add to that? Michelle, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I do. A lot of information shared here today. Thank you, everyone. It's just great. I would have to say, Christine, I agree with you. This idea of clinical participation in a clinical trial not being a last-ditch option and actually a true treatment option is somewhat intriguing. But as I kind of think about all the information shared today and these kind of common themes around patient advocacy, right? It really boils down to how do we really address all these issues around the patient? And so I'd like to throw out the idea of, is it possible for there to be an agency relationship with the patient, between the patient and the sponsors of all the trials? And there needs, for example, there needs to be this ongoing communication with the patient. There needs to be broader education around what they're involved in. You know, the problem with informed consent is the patient gets it, and they don't get it in the context of everything that's involved with the clinical trial, as many of the people here have experienced. So I'd like to kind of, I know it's somewhat broad, but you know, what about this idea of having more or somebody that can be the advocate for the patient and provide this information, so it's more consistent also.
Love that. Mark, you seem like you might have a thought on that as well.
No, I just love this, the theme that you're picking up, Christine and Michelle, around how do we make clinical trials an option? And with less than 15% of the population understanding research is even an option to them. And not only that, once you know it's an option, how do you get access to it? Once you get access to it, is there a research site near you? We're recruiting in a puddle outside of really complex rare disease. And I think they've mentioned, Michelle, around that agency middle piece. I'd really love that to be explored. I'm super passionate about that. I'd love to learn more about what people are thinking.
Michael, can I make one comment on that? Maybe even fine tune that a little more and say, how do we reframe patient advocacy groups to be more effective in the clinical trial process?
Cool.
I
like that. Elizabeth, any thoughts?
I was just clapping for all the good points. So that was me coming on and off mute. Thanks so much, Michael.
No problem. Well, I'll tell you what, we have gone a bit past our allotted hour. We do try to keep this to an hour simply because we know that there are clubhouses that go on for days. And while we've got more than a day's worth of discussion to have here, we like to make sure that we get a concentrated effort. And I want to make sure to thank each and all of you who have joined in on this. We had some new voices here, which were fantastic. Sean, Mark, I hope you'll join. Edie, always great to hear from you. And Christine, you know, we can't do this without you. You've got the vibe, so we really appreciate it. Julie, thanks again. Want to take us out?
Indeed. Hi, everyone. This is Julie speaking. Thanks, everyone, for a great conversation. Once again, these are always a blast. Great to see new faces and our regulars alike. Can't wait for the next one. In closing, again, I'm Julie Schmid, Project Manager at Consuli and host for Consuli Conversations. Just a few things to point out as we close up. Be sure to follow myself, the other moderators and panelists here. Check out other profiles in the room, and be sure to follow anyone that looks interesting to you. Be sure to check out my bio, follow our social medias. Our handle is @Consuli_Inc. You'll see it in my bio as well as in our Consuli Conversations bio. You can learn more about us that way, as well as by going to our website, consuli.net. That's CONSULI.net. For any direct questions, comments, feedback, if you want to join our panel the next time or have someone that you'd like to bring along, you can direct message me. My email is in my profile as well. We always love hearing from you. Excuse me. Again, those that have joined during our event during our opening announcements and don't quite yet know Consuli, broadly, Consuli is a public benefit company with the mission to enable individuals to participate in the data economy. Experts do suggest our data is worth about $20,000 per year. We do this by operating a marketplace for members where we become their agent and assemble their data, including health records, labs, prescriptions, wearables, quality of life surveys, and importantly, members receive smart-matched individualized offers from us for opportunities, including to participate in clinical trials and data trials. If audience members want to be part of the data dignity movement, have us be their data agent, and participate in clinical trials, you can sign up to be matched to a study at consuli.net. That's CONSULI.net. There's no cost for anyone to join our movement, and we very much look forward to our next Clubhouse discussion. I will leave this room open for those of you that want to check out bios, and I'll leave a little music running, and I'll just leave it open for a few minutes. Thanks again to everyone so much for joining us.
Thanks,
Thank
Julie.
you, guys, for always including me. It's fun.
I'm still chuckling because you asked people to follow or tag people who looked interesting. I'm going to have to change my picture if I'm going to look interesting.
Sorry for that. Sound interesting. Surely you sound very interesting.
All right. See you soon. Thank you again.
Thank you.
I will be dropping off as last. Thanks again for including me. It is always fun and it's always great to see you. Thanks, Sean, for hopping up on stage with us. It's always good to see you.
Yeah, that was great. Thanks, Christine. Really appreciate what you had to say there.
Yeah, great comments, Christine. Thank you for participation, Sean, as well.
Yeah, Julie, Michelle, thanks so much for hosting this. Looking forward to the next iteration. Christine,
Yeah.
thanks so much for pinging me. Thanks again. See you very soon.
Thanks so much, Sean.
Yeah,
Glad you reached
and,
out
I'll
on
do the-
Instagram.
I love this, right? It's like some miracle. Anyway.
Yeah, totally. It's pretty great.
It's totally fun. Anyway, thanks, Julie. I will talk to you soon.
Thanks so much. Have a good one.